Okay, so now we're moving on to Talcott Parson's school class as a social system, some of its functions in American society. Now, this is an old piece and a challenging reading, but it is a classic and it's really important to the field of sociology of education. So I would like to try to encourage you to not skip the reading, but rather read the piece in chunks, pay attention to the headers, and read for the main idea in each header. So, this piece has two main areas of interest. First is its interest in understanding how students internalize the commitments and capacities of the elements that society deems important. That is the commitment to the broad values of society and the commitment to performing certain social roles in the society. Here, I want you to think about the lessons you had related to citizenship and what you want to be when you grow up. You know, I remember my daughters, all of them actually, participated in these activities, especially like in, I want to say it was maybe like first grade, where they had a career day and the kids got to dress up in the job that they wanted to do. And, you know, that was when they were kind of learning about their career choice, and in the process as well, when, you know, they learned about their peer choice, and that exposed them to different types of professions, right, in the economy. But there's also lessons that they had to learn about their roles, not just in terms of skills, but also how to be a responsible citizen. And the other area of interest that Parsons had was how to get people to the jobs and the societal roles that need to be filled, and then how the two relate to one another, right? So, okay. So we're going to start with the process. Now, when he was talking about emancipating the child from the family, what he meant was to get the child to feel less attached to the family and the way that they do things, and to move toward and accept the ways of the school, which is actually the training ground for the adult society. And, you know, that as a society, the education system wants to get students to become accustomed to and accept the broader way that society operates and the way that formal organizations operate. And in order for children to be able to do that, they need to internalize the societal roles and norms above what the family teaches. And this is done through the daily process of going to school. Every day at school, there are lessons to learn, judgments that are made about learning those lessons, and reward structures associated with the learning. In that case, these incentives compel children to practice the lessons. Teachers judge the children based on their performances, and those performances are evaluated in terms of grades awarded, praises, rewards, punishments. Not only does the teacher make the assessments that then influence the opportunities to learn at the next grade level, but also the children within the classroom are watching their own and their peers' achievements and evaluating each other. And in that way, the teachers are stratifying the children, you know, the smartest, the smart, the average, the below average, the challenging, the problematic. And children are also stratifying each other too through their own peer interactions. There's a hierarchical ranking that happens where the peers are evaluating each other, and it's not necessarily, but it can be based on the criteria that the adult representatives have in when they're evaluating the children. This process begins in kindergarten or first grade and continues throughout the education until children reach their adult roles. Now, so for Parsons, treatment in the family is based on the individual and his own and her own unique identities and statuses within the family. Treatment and expectations is a function of generational status, like being a grandparent or a parent or an uncle, right? That generation, or a child. And those different generations are going to have different norms and statuses and expectations based on their role within the family and, you know, their generational cohort. But there's also expectations within the family that are related to sex. Well, Parsons calls it sex, but really what we're thinking about is like the role expectations and the socialization related to gender status, but also to age. But again, like there's consistencies across our society, but there's also unique expectations that are associated with each family. So for example, my family was very gendered. As the female in the family, the female child, it was my responsibility to help clean the kitchen. Whereas my brothers, it was their responsibility to help my dad with the yard work, right? And so in other families, that didn't necessarily happen by gender. It might have happened by age. There might have been like multiple siblings that divvied up tasks. But again, like the responsibilities and the roles within the family are unique to the family's own composition. But also, there are idiosyncrasies that we learn about each other within our families, and we tend to adapt to those things. We also do things within our family because we love one another and depend on one another. So our interactions and our behaviors and our expectations within the family are a function of both those emotional and intimate connections. But when we are in the broader society, the way that we interact with one another isn't necessarily based on our own personalities and our own unique characteristics. Our interactions are based on what is the goal of the organization, what is our role within the organization, and we're kind of like little widgets in those organizations that can be replaced, right, and can be interchangeable with people who are similarly skilled. And so at school, status is based on performance, how well you learn content and how well you follow the rules of the classroom or of the school. Parson says that a good thing about schools is that because schools are neighborhood schools and neighborhoods are similar economically, and because children start school at the same age, or more specifically, the classroom is a competition site to develop an achieved status, and to have a level playing field where that competition can take place. Kids in the classroom are given the same task, which is probably not the case within the family or across families. And then children are judged and ultimately ranked based on their abilities to do those tasks every day. The classroom has a teacher who is a representative of the adult world, evaluating the children in her classroom by their ability to do those tasks. And that judgment, that evaluation is happening every day. And over time, stratification based on ability and citizenship develops. And then the other thing that's really important is that the teacher takes her assessment and then passes it on to the next teacher for the next year or the next grade level. And then there are decisions that are made in terms of assigning students at the next grade level that are based on the performances that happened in the classroom that previous year. And so the status attainment and the achievement and the ranking progresses over a child's matriculation through the school. Now, when we talk about how the child is emancipated, from the family, what I want you to start to think about is that the process actually begins incrementally. And specifically in the first 3 grades, the teacher actually has this kind of quasi-mother, quasi-public role, where she holds some characteristics of like a family member, of like a motherly adult, because the child goes into her classroom and the child stays in the classroom the entire day over the whole course of the year. And in that sense, that child has daily interactions, long-term interactions with that teacher for the year, and develops a kind of emotional commitment and relationship with the teacher. But also the teacher is starting to do the universal standardized curriculum. So the kids are getting treated in a universal manner for them to be able to perform their functions. And so in that sense, the teacher is the agent of society, but she also has these other kind of motherly qualities that help transition that child into having a more formal relationship with somebody that's of the public, right? And so there is this selective rewarding that happens over the course of the year and over the course of the years, and the generation, and the achievement, the differentiating happens over time. Now, as a child moves through more grade levels, and by the time they get to the end of their elementary school experience, they're probably having more than one school teacher and more than one subject teacher. And so, the kid learns over time that there's an adult role to be played and the teacher is an adult role, but those roles are interchangeably. And over time, the child is exposed to more subjects, more complex ideas within a subject, but also is exposed to more curricular opportunities. And so in that way, right, the child then gets to exercise and develop more aptitudes. And once the child is done with the elementary school, right, the child then moves into the middle school, and the middle school's geographic diversity is larger. And again, there's even more teachers, right? And so the student may actually only have one teacher per subject matter per day, and maybe a homeroom teacher. But for the most part, now they're having like seven interchangeable teachers, and the geography is much bigger. So the rank ordering has to happen all over again. Well, not all over again, because the schools provide the records to the elementary schools provide their records to the middle school, and the middle school makes a decision on how to assign students to classes, and then the students perform in those areas, and then that hierarchical ranking again kind of progresses. Now, the other thing that also happens as students move through the school, right? This is at the elementary school level. Then we get to at the middle school level, then we get to the high school level, and it gets even bigger, right? So I actually have this chart here from Corpus Christi Independent School District that has the different high schools boundaries. And within those high school boundaries are multiple middle schools, right? And there's multiple elementary schools that feed the middle schools. And so the competition and the economic diversity gets larger and larger. And also by the time we get to high school, we're looking at very clear college prep tracks, regular tracks, vocational tracks, where kids might just go to school part of the day, but then also be working part-time as well. And as the students are having to go to schools with a wider geographic boundary, as they're getting older, they're spending less time with their family, they're doing more activities with the school, and that emancipation from the family becomes even bigger, and peers become even more important in terms of evaluating each other. And again, there's this whole different status ranking among the children that may be related to some of the values that the adult world has, but there's also a status ranking that happens among the peers that's completely independent of what's happening with the educators. And for Parsons, that's also extremely important, because eventually when the kids move out of the elementary school level and move into the adult world, they are going to then be their own adult cohort, and they're going to be working and collaborating with their peers in the community as adults, right? So the performance that's deemed important by adults is both cognitive and moral, citizenship status, right, and the skills learned. And so that differentiation that happens at the elementary school level, the cognitive and the moral are combined, because the cognitive is relatively simple. And so it becomes very important to also reward the children based on being the quote unquote ideal student, right? And so students who are very smart, but also model ideal citizenship behavior, are the ones that tend to have the highest status among the adults in the school. And then there's the reward mechanism that happens at the end of the school year, at the end of every 6 weeks, and the children are bearing witness to those things, right? And so as those opportunities to celebrate achievement happen, we're all internalizing that hierarchical ranking about who's smart, who's not, right? And again, like, we're making that evaluation of who's smart and who's not based on what the adults are doing, but also as we become more independent and get older and spend more time with our peers and start to join clubs, we're also developing an evaluation that is important for us among our own peer group, and the values that the peers have may be actually even in direct conflict with the values of the adults in that space, but also within the different segments and the different social groups on that campus. But all of that helps to feed in and mirror and reflect what's going to happen in the broader society once people are done with school. Now, those interactions, right? Our schools basically have an opportunity to help students differentiate themselves, and it's a unique space where students can learn the dominant society's values. But I think it's also really important, and Parsons points this out, that ascriptive characteristics don't ever, and the power of ascriptive characteristics doesn't ever disappear. The power of ascriptive characteristics doesn't ever disappear. And what do I mean by that? For those of you all who may not be sociology majors, or who may be new to sociology, ascriptive characteristics are characteristics that people don't really have control over. And a really important ascriptive characteristic that Parsons talks about within his work is the social class or the economic location of the families that children are born into. Kids don't get to choose who their parents are, right? And their parents have a certain amount of cultural capital, educational attainment, economic resources that constrain a child's experience. And while schools give a child an opportunity to learn new things and be exposed to new things, the role that your birth family and identities related to your birth family don't just disappear once you go into the classroom, but the classroom, the modern public classroom, gives students an opportunity to learn things that they may otherwise not learn within a family setting, or specifically just a neighborhood setting without schools. The other thing that I wanted to just mention briefly is that, Parsons talks about gender things and how, like, students might differentiate themselves by gender. And then there's some reference to courtship stuff. Don't invest a lot of energy in that. That section's probably the most outdated, again, because, when he was writing, we didn't have Title IX. There was still in our society expectation that women would, their primary role in society was to become wives and mothers. And it was very, like, heterosexual normative. So I want you to focus on, like, the cognitive component, and also the social class in terms of the ascriptive characteristics. And so as students, remember, move through the education system, for Parsons, and when Parsons was writing, kids were just now spending the majority of their childhood in classrooms, and most children were, well, not even all children, but a significant majority of children were expected to basically finish high school. But not very many children went to college when he was writing. But I still want to talk about this idea of cross pressures here, that's in this quadrant, right? This 4-cell table. So those kids with families of poor backgrounds, so low status families, and kids who had low ability, he says, were in the school setting, would experience the challenges associated with learning, and they would likely not pursue higher education. And conversely, those children with high ability and and coming from high status families were more than likely actually going to continue their education into college, right? And so we could kind of expect low status ability, exit school, enter the labor force. High status kids, high status ability would continue in the education pipeline and continue into college and then get more training that would eventually lead to them assuming professional roles in the dominant society. Now, the thing with the kids who have mixed status or mixed cross pressures, high ability, low status, or low ability, high status, these kids were likely to feel pressure about their next goal once they finished high school, or even if they finished high school. Okay, low status, low ability, high status kids would probably feel pressure to go to college, but it wouldn't be a warm and fuzzy type of thing to do. It would be something that they would have to do, and they would experience, or they could experience some form of ambivalence or alienation about the next phase of their life. Those students with high ability and low status will also likely feel cross pressures or ambivalence about the choices that they have to make as well. And so kind of just thinking about like, oh my gosh, I'm smart, I'm capable, but oh, how would I even pay for college? And because of those pressures, they might actually choose to not pursue higher education. And so while you may acknowledge that, or you may even feel like, oh gosh, that's not even very good, because then it's not really based on completely on achievement. It's also based on ascription, things that kids don't have any control over. Parson says that's fine, because in the modern society, this is a new opportunity for students to be exposed to new ideas. And absence of the modern school system, you wouldn't have these kinds of opportunities anyway. And so, the kids are confronting their limitations and opportunities of their status of their parents, and the limitations and opportunities based on the abilities of their performance status in school. And they can ultimately make a choice about which path that they're going to take. And from this perspective, the school gives students an opportunity to learn about their capacities and about the opportunities that exist beyond their families. And the stakes are high, right? And so some people do drop out or do exit the school system. But for Parsons, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, he says that it shows that the school, as a mechanism for the assortment and allocation process, is actually working in terms of getting people to either stay in or exit schools and then enter into the broader society. And it's not just about the achievement as of being evaluated by your teachers. It's also about achievement and being evaluated by your peers. So in terms of youth culture, when kids have outstanding popularity for whatever aptitude that they have, if they have outstanding popularity, they're likely to be a future leader in their community. And so, the school mechanism is a place where they get to discover that for themselves. The other thing is that if a student is kind of a middle of the ground student, a good person, relatively decent skill set, then that person is going, and he says that fellow is a good fellow and would be ready to take responsibility in the adult world. Then he says that there's another class of individuals who are kind of bordering on delinquency. But even here, he's like, wait a second, don't worry about that. Don't fret about the children who are experimenting and, playing around with deviance, because one, most children go through that, but they're also, in doing that, they are further separating themselves from their family and kind of in a process of discovery about who they are, what they value, where their own boundaries are in terms of behaviors. And it's a part of growing up, is, learning and figuring things out and becoming your own person and having your own identity. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it helps them to be an independent individual. And this is how the process of emancipating the child from his family and integrating him or her into the adult world actually happens and works. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. We're going to be moving on to the Wong piece, which is about understanding the process by which the content that the adult world evaluates children on is selected. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that one. Remember, always keep in mind, like, the tenets of functionalism. How does this article relate to the tenets of functionalism that Dr. A talked about in the first lecture, and that are in that initial handout? Okay, have a good one now.